Well, I'm really glad to be here. I've been feeling a lot for you guys as I've been sort of hearing of, the changes that you guys are all facing. I'm sure that it can't be easy. When I was thinking about this particular presentation for you guys, I put Stress Management 101 because I only have a short period of time to talk with you guys, and I know what you need is advanced stress management, given the kinds of challenges that you're contending with currently, as well as what you might be facing in the future. And part of it's the unknown. You don't know what you're going to be facing specifically, but no matter what, it's inevitable that there's going to be a lot of change. The way I got into doing presentations on stress management is I've been a social worker for close to 40 years. My specialization is working in trauma work. So you can imagine that there's a lot of stress working with trauma work. And it became real clear to me that, we really needed to take care of ourselves if we're going to survive in this wild and woolly world that we're living in. And on top of that, one of my touchstones that has really allowed me to have some level of being even-keeled and sane is that I've always practiced yoga throughout this time, and I've taught yoga for close to 15 years. So what I bring to you is going to be coming from, my experience with all of that. And the first thing I just want to mention is that we all have stress. And I think that, it's been really, really escalating in our society as a whole. It's not any one faction, that specially is selected to have more stress. I think I've just been reading a book, and I can't remember the title that somebody gave me, that's about we have the hurry sickness in our society. Do more and more and more with less and less and less, and do it quicker, do it better, etc. And I know that's true in my field. I can only imagine, that's also got to be true here. And the stress isn't good or bad. Maybe the amount of stress can become very overwhelming, but a whole lot of it has to do with how we're reacting to the stressors. How do we cope with what's coming up? And I love this line about experience is not what happens to a man or a woman, but what a man or a woman does with what happens to him or her. Because, there's a lot that we can't control. That doesn't even have to be said. But, where is it that we do have control? We know that people, are, having more and more experiences of burnout as our society and our work environments do escalate in the demands. And it's real sort of key points here about what burnout is that not just our work environments, but we ourselves start to have excessive expectations about what's doable, what we should be able to accomplish. There never seems to be an end in sight, and so we start putting more and more effort into things. And as we're efforting, we're getting less and less reward, we're depleted, we're exhausted, and ultimately we start sort of shutting down. There's a resistance to, what is going on in our lives. We numb out, and it's a very uncomfortable place to be when we're in that position. And by the way, I did want to say, I have a lot of material here, and some of it's going to be experiential and sort of group interactive kinds of things to help get some of the thinking going here. But I'm not going to have like a question. If we have time, I'll have a question and answer kind of thing at the end. But mostly I want you to bring up questions or reactions as I'm going along. So don't hesitate to interrupt me if I'm saying stuff that, it's like, ooh, I want to talk about that. We know that change is the only constant, and a lot of us start putting up that resistance, like we don't want change, we want things to be stable and secure, but ultimately we have to evolve or we're dying. And I love this little cartoon. It said, when asked, would you rather work for change or just complain? And 81% of the respondents replied, do I have to pick? This is hard. So I think a lot of us can kind of relate to, I don't want to pick, So I want to talk a little bit just about, what happens with change, and particularly when it's sort of traumatizing change. And I would say that, facing the possibility of the kinds of stressors you guys are dealing with, job loss, which is clear some people will be having, but even if you're not the one who gets selected to lose the job. You know, what's that mean to you in terms of what's got to be picked up? What else has to be contended with? Because it's not like the work goes away. But for those of you who are the ones that, you know, have the cards drawn, you know, your identity, your livelihood, there's so many aspects about what's changing. That's a trauma. It really is. It's one of the highest things. If we did a stress inventory, you know, it's one of the highest things that can really freak people out for very good reason. And when we're faced with overwhelming stressors and you don't know how to cope with it, there's no visible route that you've walked on before that you know how to handle it, this definitely impacts the hardwiring in the brain. And I just want to explain, you know, what are normal reactions to abnormal circumstances, because I think it will help you get some perspective about, gee, why am I reacting like this? And so I'm going to try not to get too much into the physiology of this, but I think it's important to understand that as the brain develops, it develops from the bottom to top, it develops from the inside to the outside and from back to front. So the most primitive parts of the brain, which are responsible for our reflective kinds of functioning, you know, the heart rate, the blood pressure, is the blood flowing, you could have a coma, the body's still going. That's the first part of the brain. The second part of the brain is the reptilian brain, or the limbic system, very emotional. And in this limbic system, right in the center, like, okay, brain's developing and young fetus here, you got the brain stem, that lower part of the brain that's just keeping the body going. Now we have the limbic system going. And right in the center of the limbic system is the amygdala. Amygdala is the core that's responsible for fight, flight, freeze responses. The whole purpose of the amygdala is to help you survive. And so then the last part of the brain is the top part of the brain, our cortex, our thinking capacities. And I won't get into a whole lot of biology here, but you know, that's the very last part. When the amygdala, when you have a lot of stress or you've had trauma, the amygdala actually gets enlarged and the energy is much quicker to go to that part of the brain, which means you're going to be more likely to be more argumentative, more ready for a fight with somebody, or you're going to freeze, be immobilized, you won't be able to think, or you run away. You know, you shut down. You try to avoid anything that reminds you of this huge stressor that's happening. On top of that, the hippocampus, it's right behind the amygdala in the brain, in that lower section. The hippocampus is a little C-section of the brain that's responsible for organizing memory. And when the amygdala is aroused, when it's stimulated, it sends out different kinds of chemicals, cortisol, chemicals in the brain, and the hippocampus starts to deteriorate. It breaks apart. It gets smaller in size, and what that means is that you can't get perspective about things. The more traumas you've had, the more stressors you've had in your life, the more this is true. So if you had a childhood where there were some really rough things that happened, and then you have something like this happen in your adult life, it's going to be even more pronounced for people that have had those kinds of experiences. The cortex, the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for our judgment, for being able to organize our thinking, our concentration, putting things into words, that actually will get smaller in size if the stress goes on and on and on, and it shuts down. If the amygdala is aroused, the thinking part of the brain does not function very well. And so it's really important to understand if you can't concentrate, you're forgetting things all the time, you're losing words, you're losing your capacity to organize your reports, whatever it is, you know, this is, again, a normal reaction to abnormal events. And then the last part, I actually learned this. I worked for the hospice for quite some time in the bereavement center with some of the most traumatic cases where people had committed suicide or somebody had witnessed homicides, that kind of thing. And the best definition I ever heard for trauma was it's the unspeakable. And then I learned that when there's really heightened stress, that the bronchia, which is responsible for speech, also starts to shut down. It's sort of like in Peanuts, you know, when the teachers are talking and all the kid hears is that wah, 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 wah. Well, that's what starts to happen. You hear things, but it just doesn't make sense. You know, you can't put things together when the bronchia starts to shut down. And again, this is accumulative and it's normal. So, you know, even if you've had the healthiest of foundations, you've had a wonderful supportive life, it will be less bad, but this still could be expected to happen. You know, the more you've had tough circumstances in your life, the more likely, you know, you are to have these kinds of reactions going on in the physiology of the brain. It is hardwired in, so you really need to appreciate that. But there's things we can do about it. I always love, I've had a lot of trauma in my life, and you know, I'd go to a massage therapist and say, relax, and I'm like, I am relaxed. You know, it's easy to say it. It's not so easy to do it when you're in these circumstances. So what do we do? What can we do? We really want to look for where do we have some ability to manage what's happening. And I just like sort of thinking about it with the ABC, real nice and simple. We need to have awareness of ourselves, balance, and connection. So I'm going to kind of describe what this entails. The first thing is with awareness. And you can't be aware if you're rushing and pushing yourself all over the place and, you know, making more and more demands on yourself. You have to give yourself some space, some time to just be, you know, in tune with yourself to see what's percolating up, what's there for you, what's happening in the body, what are you really thinking about. And, you know, if you're always in action or sleep, it's not going to happen. So if your tendency is to go out there and fight and do everything you can to take care of the situation and be in control, or you shut down, you numb yourself out, you're not really cultivating awareness. This is something that you have to create some space and time. So we need to learn how to practice mindfulness. Are there people here who are familiar with that concept? I would assume that some of you have heard of that. Yeah? Okay, I see. Yes. So would anybody like to give a description of what you think mindfulness is? Be brave.
I think of it as kind of like getting yourself to a place of quietude, or where you sort of are not even trying. You're just sort of letting, rather than trying to solve everything, you're just letting things let go almost. It sounds opposite, but at least that's my impression.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other thoughts about what might be some components about mindfulness that you'd want to just... Right. We're telling ourselves a lot of stories. You know, how we perceive things are through the lens of what we're saying to ourselves. And so just sort of quieting that a little bit, as you were saying, being with what is in the moment as fully as possible. This is the concept of mindfulness. And so you want to learn how to cultivate mindfulness. I love this, with like an attitude of curiosity. Hey, what is going on with me? You know, how am I feeling right now? What's happening in my body? You know, when you wake up, what is the story that you just told yourself as you're starting to open your eyes? You know, am I like, oh my God, I'm never going to do it today. It's just so awful. Or, you know, you can handle it one step at a time. Let's go. You know, let's see what kind of adventure we might be in for today. It's a big difference what story, you know, you're saying to yourself, and just having awareness of it is helpful. Letting go of the judgment and the self-criticism. I mean, we tend to be in a society that really is always expecting us to be happy and to be more than what we necessarily are. And so we can be very harsh critics to ourselves. And the antidote is to learn to just be there for ourselves without the judgments like, oh, okay, so right now I'm really cranky. Right now I'm really, really anxious. I'm scared. And this is how it's manifesting in my body. This is how it's coming up for me. And letting yourself be there like that. Not saying, oh, I'm anxious and so I should fix that. Going, okay, so this is how it feels. Can I be with myself? Can I be compassionate? Can I care about myself with all of these parts of myself? It's very interesting. One of the things I learned years and years ago as a therapist is that the root word for health comes from the Old English word hail. And that's also related to the word holy, healing. And what that means is that hail means that we need to be hearty and whole. And so when we accept all aspects of our experiences, of what we're feeling, you know, of whatever's coming up for us, then we're healthy. When we're whole, we're healthy. And so that takes sort of, in one form of therapy we call radical acceptance, or in some meditation practices, they call radical acceptance. You're completely accepting what is as it is, but we also, at the same time, and we know there's need for change. Things are going to change. And so, you know, we sort of accept that. We get in tune with, okay, and there's this need to change. Not but there's, you know, we have to change. It's both. So this attitude can, you know, just how we think about things makes a huge difference in terms of how we experience whatever we're, you know, whatever's going on in our lives. And so I just wanted to give you this one example because I think it's a pretty common, you know, two different ways of kind of thinking about you need to get into better shape, you need to exercise. So on one hand, a lot of us might wake up and say, oh, I'm in such bad shape, you know, I'm just going to have to whip myself into better shape and exercise more, I got to eat better. You have our big lists of resolutions that we start with January 1st and then forget about by now. Or we can say to ourselves, you know, I deserve the time and attention to give myself the gift of taking care of myself. And when I exercise, I know I will feel better. You're matter of fact, it's coming from a much more caring place. So I'm just asking you right now, if with either one of these statements, does it feel different in your body? Yes or no? It feels different, yeah. Does each statement make you feel different emotionally? Like, are you more likely to take care of yourself, really take care of yourself, if you're beating yourself up with this self-criticism about I'm in such bad shape? Or are you more likely, like, possibly to do something about whatever you need to do if you're a little bit more compassionate? Any thoughts on that? Do you think it would make a difference how you talk to yourself or how you're feeling emotionally?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Could you say a little bit, like, when you're thinking about it?
I just went through that where you know, I kept saying, I don't have time to exercise. I don't have it. And then I said, well, what's more important in the time you're using? And the second thing just came to mind.
Mm-hmm.
What you put up there. And then you don't feel like you're behind the 8 ball already.
Right.
It's just an open door.
I love what you just said, because I think many of us would say, I don't have the time, I don't have the time, I've got, well, you know, if we're saying that to ourselves, we create that trap for ourselves, and we really won't have the time. Or you could, what other people will do with it is beat up on themselves, like, and I got to do one more thing, you know, and then you feel like you're a loser because not only, you know, you're having all these other pulls and demands on yourself, but you're demanding that you're supposed to step up and do one more thing, and you can't. And so you just get into despair. And
the second example is about having hope.
Yeah. And where do you have control? And guess what? The world doesn't fall apart when you take half an hour to go get that walk, or to go do a little stretching, or to run, or whatever your thing is. You know, it makes a difference about which way you're more likely to go and how you feel about it when you're doing it. You know, if you're running because you have to, you're probably pounding on your body and your attitude is pounding in your head. Whereas if you're doing it like, oh, I'm free, I get some fresh air, this really is going to be revitalizing, you're going to enjoy it a whole lot more. And so, you know, obviously, you know, if you talk to yourself in these more positive ways, and we all fall into these traps. It's a spectrum, though. You know, what are you saying to yourself most of the time? And when you find yourself speaking to yourself in this harsh, critical, demanding kind of way, can you just go, oh, there I am, being the harsh, critical critic, the judge. You know, what can I do to kind of shift that mind state for myself? And go to what statement is going to be more helpful. A long time ago, I heard, oh, I'm going to forget her name, darn. who was the guy? Christopher Reeves played Superman. Reeve. Okay. And Barbara Walters was interviewing his wife, who I can no longer remember her name. I'm sorry. This is this is a stress thing with me. I can't remember names very well. But Barbara was saying something to her about, you know, when this first happened to Chris, weren't you just, you know, filled with fear and anxiety and horrible thoughts about what would happen? What made you not, you know, give up and to lose hope? And I think it was Dana Reeves said, yes, of course. You know, of course my mind was filled with all these horrible fantasies about what was to become of our family, what were we going to do to cope. And she said, and I went to a therapist, and the therapist said one thing to me in the first session, and it was enormously helpful. She said, Dana, you've got to really recognize, is this thinking helpful? It's not helpful. So just tell yourself, this isn't helpful. And she said, from that point on, I was able to recognize when I was doing that to myself, and it just made this shift, you know, like, okay, that's not helpful. What else can I do? How else can I think about that? And I love that story, you know, I mean, it's just such a simple little key, like, what could we do? So now, I'm going to ask you to, first of all, take your note cards and just for yourself, write down one belief about what your situation at work is, like one thing you've been saying to yourself, and then kind of share that with each other at your table. And just notice how this belief makes you feel. Notice whether the belief is true or not true. Is it absolutely, for sure, positively true? You know, is it helpful? And if it's not helpful, can you generate something that would be more helpful? So you can kind of, you know, start with just doing like one thought that you have, then share it and pick one of the thoughts, because it's going to take too long to do everybody's thought, and work on this collectively. One thought that sort of resonates with the group. So we'll take like 5-10 minutes for this. I'd like a little discussion about this, but I would ask that you raise your voice because they're videotaping this for other people to be able to observe if they weren't able to come today. So it would help if you could speak up. So if anybody's brave enough, I'd appreciate it. What were some of the thoughts that came up, and were you able to think about some other ways to... What was that?
She volunteered to speak for our group. Okay, my card said, this job is not within my control, so start thinking about options. Another card, frustrated and less caring. Another card, I'm older, not educated, and won't get a job anytime soon.
So say that the last one.
Older and undereducated and worried about a future job.
I'm older, I'm undereducated, and I'm really worried about that I won't be able to get a future job.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a pretty miserable sort of way of thinking about it. That's got to be pretty upsetting. Does it make you feel that, you know, anybody thinking that? How do you think you'd feel? Yeah?
I won't go so far as saying undereducated, but the age thing.
But the age what?
Age thing is a concern.
The age thing is a concern. So you can relate to that thought, yeah. And when you start saying that kind of thing to yourself, how does that impact you? The feeling-wise.
Well, I feel like I'm probably going to be able to get another job doing something, but I'm just worried about what.
Okay, so that's an interesting shift because you started to challenge the thinking right then and there. You know, it's like, okay, you know, the age thing is of concern, but maybe there's some freedom in this, and I'll be able to make some other choices. I just don't know what. So there still might be some anxiety to it, but it's not saying this is absolutely hopeless, there's no way out, I'm going down, baby, you know, right? So that's more accurate, and it's a helpful reframing. Did you guys have any other reframing that you were able to do with the statement? About, guys, you got to do the whole exercise. Okay, it's brave of you to put those out. And I really, I know I'm asking people to be kind of vulnerable because we all walk around with these masks, like, I'm fine, aren't you fine? But really it's like, oh man, I'm losing my career, it's going down, this is really terrible, how am I going to cope with this, and da-da-da-da. So, I know it's a little vulnerable to put out, what's underneath the mask. What are you really thinking? What are you really feeling? How about another? Is there any other group or person that's willing to volunteer another thought that was coming up? Yeah, thank you.
Mine says, I want my fuchsia Camaro, meaning that I want my dream car. So regardless of what happens here, I still have to keep going so I can get my car.
So that's not exactly a thought about work, but it's a thought about your goal in life. My goal is I want my Camaro, or I want my dream car.
The car is kind of like a metaphor, meaning that there are so many other things that I still want
right.
to accomplish and achieve, that this is just a bump in the road. I have to continue doing what I need to do to keep moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
So the car is just a symbol of that.
Right. So you're using that thought about your work, experience right now is something to kind of propel you forward, to keep your efforts up so that you can attain what your dream is and get past that bump in the road. I like that you have a car analogy with a bump in the road. This is a bump in the road or a turn in the road. So, yeah. Any other thoughts? Any other things that came up about work? Yeah. Thank you.
Well, one of the things we agreed on is that there are just so many unknowns, and we hardly know what to believe about work, other than, it's no fun anymore, we don't have any control over it, and it's been handled really badly. We're all angry.
Mm-hmm.
The livelihoods are being taken away from us. We couldn't really reframe that into a more positive way.
Well, when I hear what you're saying, I hear you saying, I have no control. People are definitely taking away my livelihood. In some ways, there's aspects of that that are true, but is that completely true? Do you have absolutely no control?
Over what happens here, or what happens personally?
Well, what happens to you personally?
Yeah.
Do you have some ability to find other livelihood? Yeah. Is it more helpful and accurate to think in terms of where do I have control? What I will have, to say to yourself, I will have other options. I will have other options about my livelihood. Might not be what I pictured for myself, but it's less demoralizing. And you know what? There's a point, I do want to make a comment. I had one of my staff, I was doing a similar training for my staff, and he said, yeah, but there's a certain point where you're putting whipped cream on top of garbage. He used another word, but you get the point, right? And to a certain degree, I think that's true. We can be doing all the positive affirmations in the world. If you don't believe the affirmation, it's not going to do you a whole lot of good. Although I would suggest to you that you got to start somewhere, and sometimes it's going to feel kind of contrived, or like you're making stuff up. But if you start examining things from other points of view, and you can find that germ of truth, that kernel of truth, and start building on that, you're going to be able to be more successful. We know that how we think about things strongly shapes what happens, how things unfold, what our energy and our attitude is like, and what we're going to draw back to us in the world. This isn't, it's like quantum physics. There's so much more interconnection and energy involved in what we're attracting to us and, what we experience, that how we think about it makes a huge, huge difference. So can you find some, little kernel of truth there that feels kind of honest, and work on that makes it more accurate and more helpful? Does it help you to keep saying, I have no control? And is that absolutely accurate? Because if you tell yourself that and really buy into that, you're really going to limit your ability to respond in a constructive kind of way. So it's a bit of a challenge. I know when you feel like this, it's like, I have no energy to think differently. I don't want to, but the more you can kind of engage in this way, in a compassionate, not a, like we were talking about, not beating up on yourself, but like, look, this is happening one way or the other, so how am I going to approach it? Am I just going to keep beating up on myself and the situation and perseverating about how horrible this is, or can I find something that might be, I liked what you were saying, something that's sort of freeing about it, something that's like, okay, this isn't what I had planned, it's not what I would have anticipated, but it's a bump in the road. I'm going to take another route than I had anticipated. And it's possible for me to do that. I can find some other ways to use my talents, to redefine myself. So, I don't want to be putting whipped cream on garbage, but I would also challenge you to find, where you can do that constructively and honestly. One of my favorite lines that I ask for myself in my own thinking, but also before I speak is it kind? Is it true? Is it helpful? And do I need to say this now? So just, that kind of thinking. I love this. This comes from Joan Borisenko, and she talks about that in order to change our pessimism to optimism, we have to change, we have to notice the P's in our thinking. When we're thinking things are, like sort of what you just had the courage to bring up, it's pervasive, it's permanent, it's personal, it's all about me. When you're thinking with those P's, those kinds of thoughts, you need to look for the C's of optimism. Where is there a challenge? Where do I have control? How can I make a commitment to taking a step in some direction that's going to move me in the direction of, accepting this challenge and where I have control? So Joan says you have to quit peeing on yourself and start seeing things in new ways. So I think that's kind of a good analogy to remind ourselves of. So what we want to do is we want to aim for balance. And I use the word aim because if like balance is not easy. It's not something that just comes naturally. As a matter of fact, I want you all to stand up. I don't want you to fall asleep on me at noon. And we're going to try a little something here. Now, I don't know how many of you, practice yoga, but most of you are pretty familiar that in yoga we're looking for balance. And so I want you to just do Karate Kid. You're going to be brave. Bring your arms up, get a focal point, and lift one leg. And as you're standing here, notice what's happening as you try to do this. I hear some laughter. Notice the mind, talk that you have, like, oh, I can't do this. I'm failing. Somebody's going to see that I can't do this. And release. Was there anybody that was rock solid, didn't waver at all? No? No volunteers? Was everybody wiggling a little bit? Yeah. This is balance, okay? It's not like, ta-da, I've got it, and it's steady. We're tacking like in a sailboat, little this, little that. This is what's going on inside of me. This is what's happening in the outside. All kinds of things affect our balance. Now, since we did one side, we have to do the other. Find a focal point, arms up, other side, whichever side you started on. And just breathe. Keep your eyes soft. Slow down your breath a little bit. Imagine roots into the ground. Be gentle with yourself. If you're having a hard time, be a little compassionate, like, oh, so it's a little tougher than I thought. And let go. Okay, very nice. You guys can sit down. So the idea is that, it's not like, ta-da, you're going to get it and you're just going to hold it. We're all wavering all the time. But we want to have this balance between play, work, and rest. And to do that, on one hand, you have to take action. You have to use discipline. Like the Nike commercial. I'm not particularly a big fan of Nike for all kinds of political reasons, but I like their advertisement. Just do it. You don't argue with yourself. You just get up and do it. But when you can't, because you will fall short, you won't have the energy all the time, then you need compassion. You need time to reflect. You need time to nurture and take care of yourself. And you need to go back and forth between these realms, creating this space for play, work, and rest. And this is one of the things, like I liked your thing about the exercise. I don't have time, I don't have time, I don't have time. But what I would say is you've got to claim the time. You have to claim the time to do things that are diversions, that are fun, that are playful. You have to claim the time to rest. It's not like someone's going to put it in your calendar and say, oh, here, I'm going to create the perfect space for you. This is your life. You need to put yourself in your calendar just as much as you would any other appointment, you know, and it's probably the most important appointment. And I will suggest to you, because I used to think that way all the time, and believe me, my job is a suck hole. I'm sure yours is too, but you know, it's like a vortex that just won't let go, you know? And so I started like, I know this sounds ridiculous, but I get up pretty early in the morning and I do a little yoga, I do some meditation, I take a couple-mile walk every single day. I don't care what the weather's like. And I used to think, oh, I don't have time for this. But I do it, and it sets the tone of my day completely different. Now, that's what works for me, but, you know, I don't know what will work for other people, but you've got to find that place. And you know what? The world didn't fall apart when I came to work half an hour later because, gee, I took the time to walk a little slower. Or, you know, I took the time to make myself a decent lunch so that I wasn't starving by 4 o'clock and ready to, you know, have a bunch of wine to like numb myself down because, you know, I had overdone and not taken care of myself. It's those small little details that make a big difference. So the discipline isn't just to work more. The discipline is to do all of these things, to create that space for yourself.